So what if the absolute best way to figure out the toxic motives of your absolute worst coworker isn't by studying them at all?
Right, which sounds totally counterintuitive.
It really does.
Yeah.
I mean, what if the secret to understanding your enemy or, navigating an incredibly frustrating relationship or just figuring out why people do the baffling things they do is actually studying a past, highly flawed version of yourself?
Yeah, it's a complete inversion of how we usually try to solve human problems because,
Hmm.
I mean, we spend so much energy trying to look inside other people's heads.
Oh, constantly.
Right, we're always trying to read minds from the outside when the only fully observable system we will ever actually have access to is our own.
And we are just terrible at reading those external minds. We look at other people and we construct these massive, elaborate theories about their secret motives or their deep-seated character
So
flaws.
yeah, the hidden agendas.
Exactly, the hidden agendas. We work with maybe 10% of the data and we just fill in the other 90% with our own biases. But today, we are flipping that script entirely.
We really are.
We're taking a deep dive into a really profound collection of research today. It explores systems theory, the mechanics of psychological shifts, and this incredibly elusive concept of practical wisdom.
Which is such a massive topic.
It is, and we're doing it by looking at a radical reinterpretation of some very ancient historical narratives, which I have to admit, I was completely blown away by.
Yeah, it is a fascinating way to approach cognitive science. Because if you strip away the historical theology and, you look past the moral judgments we usually attach to these ancient stories, what you find is basically a blueprint.
Right, like an engineering manual.
Exactly.
Mm.
You find these early thinkers treating the human mind as a system. And the core premise we are going to explore today is that this system, your mind, actually learns best, and perhaps only learns deeply, through its own errors.
Wait, so not by reading another book?
No, not at all. True wisdom isn't about acquiring new information. It is not about reading another self-help book or memorizing another philosophy. It's about reorganizing yourself around the highly detailed memory of your own failures.
So you can actually apply the things you already know.
Precisely. It's about application, not just accumulation.
It's the difference between knowing the theory of something and actually living it. And to really get into the mechanics of how we cross that bridge, how we move from abstract knowledge to practical wisdom, we are going to unpack a specific narrative archetype today.
Yeah, the astrologer's shift.
Right, the astrologer shift. And for everyone listening, this isn't just an old fable. It is a structural map of how human transformation actually works.
To really understand the shift, we have to understand the starting point. So picture this figure, the astrologer. He begins his journey as a completely faithful transmitter of inherited knowledge.
Okay, so he's just passing things down.
Exactly. He is teaching Jewish astrology, which, at the time meant he was teaching the patterns of the sky, the cosmic cycles, the intricate rules of the heavens.
So he's not predicting the future in a newspaper column. He's basically an astronomer of his era.
Right, he's dealing with the grand mechanics of the universe. And he is teaching it exactly as his grandparents handed it down to him, without changing a single detail.
He is the ultimate steward of tradition, then. He's not out there trying to be an innovator or a rebel or anything.
No, not at all. And because of that, he has immense authority within his community. He represents continuity in a very chaotic world.
People like certainty.
They do. When people want to know how reality works, they go to him. He maps everything outwardly. He can point to the stars, explain the complex symbols, and tell his students exactly how the universe is perfectly ordered.
And if you look at this structurally, the system he is operating within makes perfect sense on paper, right?
Oh, absolutely. There are no visible fractures. He can answer any question his students throw at him based on this inherited framework.
But there's a catch.
A huge catch. There is a massive hidden vulnerability in his position. He is fundamentally misaligned. He is repeating truth, but he hasn't integrated it.
What do you mean by integrated it?
Well, he has never turned his incredibly sophisticated interpretive system back onto himself.
Oh, I see. So he has proximity to the truth, but not coherence with it.
That's a perfect way to put it.
It's like, think about it like having the source code for a massive, brilliant piece of software. You can read the code, you can teach other people how to read the code, you can explain the elegant logic of all the loops and variables.
Yeah, you're the master of the code.
Right. But you have never actually compiled that code and run it on your own machine. You know what it's supposed to do, but you've never experienced it operating.
That is a great way to visualize it. The astrologer is looking at the source code of the universe, but he's treating it purely as an external document.
So what changes?
Well, the catalyst for change, the actual shift, doesn't happen because someone proves his astrology wrong. It happens when a new environmental pressure is introduced. In this narrative, that pressure is Greek analytical logic.
Okay, this is a really important distinction for us to make. The Greek logic doesn't ride into town and say, hey, the stars are a lie, throw away your charts.
No, not at all. It does something much more dangerous to a comfortable system.
It interrogates it.
Exactly. It interrogates it. It demands internal coherence. Greek logic introduces a totally new standard of validation.
It's asking for proof, essentially.
Well, it essentially asks the astrologer, does this system you teach hold together when it is examined from every single angle? And more importantly, does it apply to the person teaching it?
Oh, wow. So it forces him to look in the mirror.
For the very first time in his life, yes. It forces him to look inward. And when he applies that analytical rigor to his own life, the pressure causes a pretty devastating realization.
He realizes he is a massive hypocrite.
A total hypocrite. He has been teaching a universal truth that he has entirely failed to apply to his own daily existence.
So the cycles of conflict and, alignment and resolution that he taught as purely celestial phenomena.
Things happening millions of miles away in the sky, yeah.
Right. They are suddenly recognized as psychological patterns operating right inside his own mind. He's been looking through a telescope when he really should have been looking in a mirror.
And that realization is the gap between knowing and doing. When you just teach the source code, you can feel very confident.
Yeah, you look like the smartest guy in the room.
Exactly. But the moment someone asks you to actually run the program, you realize that possessing the knowledge is entirely different from executing the knowledge.
Right.
The astrologer realizes that his initial state, that comfortable period where everyone respected him and he felt perfectly secure, was actually a structural reality of incomplete perception.
He was completely fragmented and didn't even know it. But here is what's really fascinating about this deep dive. When he realizes this, it's not just a momentary pang of guilt, is it?
No, it's not a fleeting thought of, oh, I should really practice what I preach. This realization is described as literally fracturing his internal configuration. It splits his identity in two.
And this is where the narrative archetype brings in some extremely heavy symbolism. The framework uses the ancient figures of Judas and Jesus to map this psychological split.
Right, but we need to be very, very clear here.
Yes, absolutely. We are not talking about historical enemies walking around the desert in the first century.
No, the system's archaeological reading in our sources treats these figures as a dyad. A dyad is simply a pair of opposing but interconnected parts.
Two sides of the same coin.
In this context, they represent two sequential states within a single system, which is to say, they are two different operating configurations within a single human mind.
One life unfolding through two names.
Exactly, or two phases of development.
Let's really dig into these two configurations, because honestly, this is where it gets incredibly practical for anyone listening to this. First, we have the Judas configuration.
Right, the former self.
In this psychological model, Judas represents that egoic teacher we were just talking about. It is the part of your mind that possesses the knowledge, knows the rules perfectly, but absolutely fails to apply them. It is the state of total misalignment.
And if you look at the characteristics of the Judas configuration, it acts out of repetition. It relies heavily on delay. It thrives on incomplete integration.
So it's basically the ultimate procrastinator.
Essentially, yes. The system contains all the information it needs to act correctly, but it constantly substitutes explanation for execution.
Oh, I hate how familiar that sounds.
Right. It is that voice inside you that says, I understand the problem perfectly and I will definitely handle it tomorrow, while actively finding every possible rationalization to bypass the uncomfortable action today.
Think about your own life for a second. We're all running this Judas software constantly. You know exactly what a healthy diet looks like.
Oh, everyone does.
You've read the articles, you understand the biology, the map is right there in your hands. But when you are stressed out at 9 p.m., you rationalize ordering the pizza.
Yeah, I had a hard day. I deserve it.
Exactly. Or think about a tense relationship. You know you should communicate openly. You know you shouldn't get defensive. But the moment you feel criticized, you snap back anyway. You possess the knowledge, but you completely delay the application.
This maps flawlessly onto what cognitive scientists call the intention-behavior gap.
The intention-behavior gap. I love that term.
It's a massive area of study in psychology. Researchers have documented over and over again that knowing what is right, wanting to do what is right, and sincerely intending to do what is right are just structurally insufficient to produce the right action.
That is so depressing, but also very true.
It is true. Our brains are incredibly adept at overriding our conscious commitments with situational triggers, automatic habit loops, and cognitive ease.
Because the Judas configuration is designed to protect the ego.
That's its primary function.
It maintains its authority by keeping the knowledge abstract. If the knowledge stays abstract, you never have to actually do the hard work of changing your behavior.
Exactly. It's safe.
But once the astrologer sees this gap, once that Greek analytical logic forces him to realize that his celestial cycles are actually his own unexamined psychological flaws, the system just can't sustain the contradiction anymore, can it?
No, the illusion is completely broken. Cognitive dissonance sets in. And cognitive dissonance isn't just a feeling of mild discomfort,
What is it, really?
It is a neurological alarm bell. The brain strongly prefers consistency. When you hold a core belief about yourself, like, I am a wise, integrated teacher, and you are suddenly confronted with undeniable evidence to the contrary.
Like, I do not practice anything I teach.
Right. When that happens, the tension becomes structurally unsustainable. The misaligned system becomes fully visible to itself, and it can no longer hide behind its own distortions.
So the old way literally has to break down. In the ancient narrative form, this collapse is symbolized as Judas committing suicide, which obviously sounds incredibly dark and dramatic to modern ears.
It does, but when we look at this through the lens of systems theory, it completely reframes the concept.
Yeah, this isn't a literal death.
Not at all. It is not a moral punishment from the universe. It is simply the termination of a configuration that has lost its internal coherence.
An incompatibility cascade.
Yes. A behavioral pattern that depends on unrecognized contradiction simply crashes when that contradiction is made explicit and undeniable. The system is forced to reorganize because the previous structure can no longer hold the weight of reality.
It just buckles.
It buckles. And this introduces a beautiful, really counterintuitive concept from our sources. The idea of giving life through termination.
Giving life through termination. That's a great phrase.
The ending of the misaligned structure, the crash of the Judas operating system, is exactly what clears the processing power for the aligned system to emerge.
And that aligned system is the second half of the diet, right?
Yes, the Jesus configuration or the Christ within.
This represents the self that simply enacts the truth that is already known. It doesn't need to go out and discover new information. It's not looking for a new guru.
It doesn't need a new set of rules at all.
It just brings behavior into complete correspondence with the understanding that the Judas configuration was hoarding but refusing to use.
The aligned configuration corrects structure rather than defending it. It executes the code instead of just analyzing it.
It runs the program.
It runs the program. But here is the critical insight about the diet, and we cannot stress this enough. The second state cannot possibly exist without the first.
Oh, wait, really?
Yes. The application of truth only becomes structurally possible because the misalignment has been fully encountered, mapped, and recognized. You cannot skip the Judas phase.
That is huge. And that brings us to the absolute crux of this entire deep dive. This is the part that completely shatters how the self-improvement industry usually tells us to operate, I think.
Oh, completely.
When the old, hypocritical, misaligned identity collapses, it is not erased. The brain doesn't just hit the delete key. That period of failure is actively retained as a complete lived data set of error.
This is the exact birthplace of practical wisdom. You do not try to move past your hypocrisy. You do not try to forget the years you spent making bad decisions.
You don't just forgive and forget.
No, you preserve the former self as a reference architecture. The astrologer remembers with agonizing clarity exactly how his former self justified its actions.
He keeps the receipts.
He absolutely keeps the receipts. He maps exactly where it hesitated, how it used eloquent explanations to avoid difficult actions, and how it distorted reality to protect its ego.
Okay, hold on. Let's play devil's advocate for a second here. Because if we start building an active, highly detailed catalog of every single time we've been hypocritical or lazy or totally misaligned, doesn't that just turn into a massive guilt trip?
That is the very natural fear.
Right. That sounds like a recipe for constant shame, not wisdom. Isn't the whole point of personal growth to let go of the past and forgive yourself?
And that's exactly why most people avoid this kind of deep internal audit. But if you look at how systems theory approaches this, there is a massive fundamental difference between emotional guilt and structural retention.
Okay, unpack that for us.
Guilt is an emotional judgment. It is a voice that says, I did a bad thing, therefore I'm a bad person. It is
It
paralyzing.
makes you want to hide.
Yes. Structural retention, on the other hand, says this is exactly how my system failed under these specific conditions. It is completely neutral data. It is an internal encyclopedia of vulnerability.
Oh, I see. It's like a virus signature in an antivirus software. The software doesn't feel guilty that it let a Trojan horse in last week, but it absolutely remembers the exact shape and behavior of that Trojan horse.
Precisely. If your antivirus software deleted its memory of the virus because of thinking about the virus made it feel ashamed, your computer would get infected by the exact same virus the next day.
That makes perfect sense.
Practical wisdom only emerges when your current knowledge is deeply anchored to the remembered non-application of your former self. You keep the Judas configuration alive in your memory as the ultimate verified reference point for how truth breaks down in the real world.
So you're basically saying, I know exactly how I lie to myself, so I can catch the self-deception the millisecond it starts booting up.
That's it. That is the shift.
That is an incredibly powerful way to live. And if we want to look at the hard science of how this works, we have to talk about cybernetics.
We do.
Because moving from ancient myth into modern systems engineering, this mechanism is essentially the work of Gregory Bateson, right?
Yes. Gregory Bateson is a towering figure in cybernetics and systems theory. And cybernetics, at its core, is the study of how systems regulate themselves through communication and feedback.
So not just robots.
Not just robots. Biological systems, social systems, cognitive systems. The classic, universally understood example of a cybernetic system, though, is a thermostat.
Right, the literal thermostat on your wall.
Exactly. A thermostat doesn't operate by magic. It operates through a very specific feedback loop. Let's break it down. First, it has a reference point.
Like you set it to 70 degrees.
Right. Second, it acts.
Yeah.
It measures the current temperature of the room. Third, it observes a misalignment.
So the room is actually 65 degrees.
Yes. Fourth, it retains that data of the error, the 5-degree gap. And fifth, it reconfigures the environment by turning on the furnace until the error is eliminated. The system literally learns and operates through the constant measurement of its own errors.
It's entirely mechanical. It's not about the thermostat being a good thermostat or a bad thermostat.
It's just processing the gap.
And this framework completely redefines some very heavy, culturally loaded words. Like, take the concept of sin, for example. For centuries, this word has been drenched in moral condemnation and shame.
It's a very heavy word.
But if you look at its structural root, particularly the Greek word hamartia, it literally means missing the mark.
Like an archer shooting an arrow and missing the target.
Exactly. When you strip away the historical baggage and look at missing the mark through Bateson's cybernetics, sin is no longer a permanent moral stain.
It really isn't. It is simply a structural reality of incomplete application. It is the thermostat reading 65 when the goal is 70.
That takes so much pressure off.
It does. We are all born structurally capable of missing the mark. It is a necessary part of the feedback loop.
And if sin is just a targeting error, then the solution isn't to sit around crying about how terrible you are. The solution is the second redefined word in our sources, repentance.
Right. The original Greek word here is metanoia.
And again, we usually associate repentance with emotional remorse, begging for forgiveness, making a big public display of sorrow.
Tearing your clothes, yeah.
But metanoia structurally means a change of mind, a level shift in the system. It is the reorganization of the process that produces actions.
This is where Bateson's concept of learning levels becomes really essential to understanding practical wisdom. Bateson differentiated between level I learning and level 2 learning.
Okay, let's break those down.
Level I learning is correcting an error within your existing framework.
So going back to our archery example, if sin is the arrow missing the target because the archer's form is off, level I learning is the archer saying, okay, I missed. I will try harder next time. I will pull the bowstring back a little further.
Right, but they're still using the exact same faulty stance.
So they'll probably miss again.
Most likely. Level I learning is trying to optimize a flawed system, but level 2 learning is entirely different. Level 2 learning is changing the framework itself.
A paradigm shift.
Exactly. It is recognizing that the entire stance is wrong, the bow's warped, and the way you perceive the target is fundamentally flawed. Level 2 is an update to the underlying operating system.
It's the robot archer realizing its targeting sensor is permanently drifted by 2 degrees, and instead of just trying to compensate manually every single time, it actually rewrites its base code to permanently account for the drift.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is a perfect analogy. The transition from the Judas configuration to the Jesus configuration, the astrologer shift, is a profound level 2 reorganization.
It's a deep rewrite.
It is not the astrologer deciding to be a slightly more honest guy today. It's a fundamental alteration of the internal pattern by which his system perceives and interprets reality. He permanently updates his software to include the data of his own capacity for self-deception.
Okay, so let's say you've done the work. You've experienced the cognitive dissonance. You've watched your own personal Judas configuration crash.
And you survived it.
And you survived it. You haven't hidden from it. You've retained the data. You now have this massive, highly detailed internal error log of exactly how you mess up, how you justify bad behavior, and how you delay necessary action.
You've got the encyclopedia.
Right. Now what? Because the real promise of this deep dive is that armed with this internal archive, you can look back out at the external world, at your frustrating coworkers, your difficult family members, with a completely transformed lens.
And this brings us to how we actually solve the problem of understanding other people without projecting our own biases onto them.
Which we do all the time.
All the time. To understand why we are normally so bad at this, we have to look at a foundational concept in social psychology called the actor-observer asymmetry.
I love this concept. It's such a fascinating quirk of the human brain.
It really is. The actor-observer asymmetry describes a cognitive bias where we explain our own negative behavior through the lens of situational context, but we explain other people's identical negative behavior as a fundamental character defect.
Give me a real-world example of how we do this.
Okay, think about driving. Everyone relates to this. If you accidentally cut someone off in traffic, what is your immediate internal monologue?
Oh, it's always, I'm so sorry, the sun was in my eyes, I was distracted by my GPS, the lanes merged way too quickly.
Exactly. You have a dozen contextual reasons for why your action was a momentary lapse in an otherwise very good person.
I am a saint who just happened to make a mistake.
Right. But if someone else cuts you off in traffic,
Oh, they are an absolute maniac. They are a deeply selfish, aggressive person who probably kicks puppies. I don't think about the sun in their eyes at all. I judge their entire existence based on a 2-second action.
we all do it. We give ourselves the grace of context, but we judge them purely on the action, assuming it reveals their core character.
And we do this in the workplace constantly.
Yes, if you miss a deadline, it's because you were overworked, the project scope changed, your dog was sick. If your coworker misses a deadline, it's because they are lazy and disorganized and they don't care about the team.
But the astrologer, having gone through the shift and retained his internal encyclopedia of error, no longer falls into the trap of the actor-observer asymmetry.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't need to guess at the hidden motives of his students or his peers anymore.
Because he knows what it looks like from the inside.
Exactly. When he sees someone failing to apply what they know, he doesn't construct a wild moralistic theory about their hidden malice. He simply recognizes the exact same structural gaps between knowing and doing that he has already mapped out within himself.
He recognizes the pattern.
Because fundamentally, the self is the only fully observable system you will ever have access to.
It's the only one you have the admin password for.
Right. If you try to figure out your coworkers' motives, you are guessing. You don't know their childhood traumas, their financial stresses, their secret fears, or their inner monologue.
You're just making it up.
You really are. But you have 100% of the data on your own past failures. You know exactly what it feels, though, to know you should send a difficult email, feel a spike of anxiety about the potential response, rationalize that it can definitely wait until after lunch, and then end the day pretending you were just too busy to get to it.
I feel personally attacked right now.
Well, it's universal. You know the exact sequence of the self-deception code.
So, by internalizing the enemy, you use your own verified bad example to achieve precise pattern matching.
Yes. It is a brilliant psychological hack.
It really is. You bypass the ego's desperate need to feel superior to the other person. You can't feel superior because you are matching their external, frustrating behavior to your own verified internal failures.
And it completely neutralizes the emotional volatility of dealing with difficult people.
Yeah.
You stop reacting with anger or moral judgment, and you start recognizing structural breakdowns.
It shifts you from being an outraged victim of someone else's behavior to being a structural mechanic.
Yes, a mechanic. Let's apply this. Instead of looking at that toxic coworker who constantly shifts the blame during meetings and asking yourself, why are they so evil? What is wrong with them?
Which just spins you out.
Exactly. Instead, you look at their behavior, the defensiveness, the redirection, and you consult your internal archive.
You say, I recognize this specific subroutine. I have run this exact pattern of blame shifting myself when I felt deeply insecure about my performance.
You aren't judging them as a supervillain anymore. You're simply recognizing a faulty operating system that you yourself used to run.
And that recognition radically reduces the complexity of the interaction. The situation becomes legible to you.
It does. You can say, I know how this pattern functions because I have lived inside it. And that changes how you intervene.
You don't just attack their character.
No, because you know that would only make them more defensive. You address the structural fear or the misalignment because you know exactly where the breakdown is occurring in the system.
It's like you become a master mechanic for human behavior, but the only engine you ever actually took apart and studied was your own.
That's a beautiful metaphor.
But because all human engines work on basically the same principles, you can hear a weird knocking sound in someone else's engine and know exactly which valve is sticking.
That is the essence of practical wisdom. The outward expression of the behavior might look completely different. Different language, different professional context, different stakes, but the underlying structural movement remains remarkably consistent.
The gap between abstract knowledge and practical application is the universal human dilemma.
It is the human condition.
Now, a skeptic might listen to all of this and say, okay, this is a very elegant philosophical theory. It's a nice way to interpret an ancient story and some cybernetic models.
Sure, it sounds a bit academic.
Right. But if this pattern of breaking down the misaligned self and rebuilding around the error log is truly how human beings gain wisdom, it begs a physical question.
The biological hardware.
Exactly. Is our biological hardware actually built for this? Does the brain physically force us to go through this Judas phase of misalignment?
That is where this deep dive bridges the gap between systems theory and developmental biology. Because the biological timeline of human development perfectly mirrors the necessity of this exact mechanism.
And it all centers around the prefrontal cortex.
Yes, the prefrontal cortex.
This is the part of the brain right behind your forehead, right?
Yes, it is the region of the brain associated with complex planning, impulse control, emotional regulation, and the integration of conflicting information. It is the executive control center.
The CEO of the brain.
Right. And neurologically speaking, it famously does not fully mature until early adulthood, typically not until our mid-20s.
Which means we are biologically destined, structurally hardwired, to spend our first 2 decades on Earth being incredibly impulsive, misaligned messes.
We really are. We literally do not have the hardware fully installed to consistently apply the things we know.
In systems terms, human biology mandates a prolonged, absolutely necessary period where misalignment is guaranteed. Think about a teenager.
Oh, teenagers are the perfect example.
Right. A teenager can often articulate perfectly logical arguments. They possess abstract knowledge. They know the rules. But their behavior is often wildly out of sync with that knowledge.
Because the executive function required to enforce that alignment is literally still under construction.
So we literally must accumulate instances of non-application. We need those first 20-something years to do stupid things, make bad choices, and act hypocritically.
Because we are building the data set.
If the prefrontal cortex fully matured at age 5, we would never make any mistakes.
No, but we also wouldn't have the lived, deeply felt archive of failure required to generate deep empathy and practical wisdom later in life. We need the Judas configuration to run wild for a while, so we have enough raw data to eventually form the Jesus configuration.
Without the lived experience of error, your wisdom is just abstract theory.
It's just words on a page. And evolutionary biology takes this concept even further when we look at the lifespan of the human species, specifically through something called the grandmother hypothesis.
I find this part absolutely fascinating, because humans live significantly longer than their reproductive window.
Much longer.
For the vast majority of species on Earth, once an organism can no longer reproduce, nature phases it out. The biological imperative is over. But humans regularly live 3, 4, even 5 decades past their reproductive prime. From a purely evolutionary standpoint, why does nature keep us around so long?
The standard evolutionary argument of the grandmother hypothesis is that post-reproductive individuals contribute to the survival of the group's genes, not by having more children, but by providing accumulated knowledge, childcare, and social stability.
Which ensures the survival of their grandchildren.
Exactly. But when we view this through the framework of our deep dive practical wisdom through self-reference, that extended lifespan is the biological runway for integration.
It's the time required to process the archive.
Yes. When you are young, you are urgently acquiring data. You are acquiring resources, finding mates, raising children, surviving. You are constantly acting and making errors.
It's a very noisy phase of life.
It's incredibly noisy. In the later stages of life, the biological urgency quiets down, providing the cognitive bandwidth to finally consolidate and apply a lifetime of retained failure modes.
Older individuals who have actively engaged in this process demonstrate incredibly fast pattern recognition. They don't rely on surface features or emotional reactivity because their internal archive of human behavior, built entirely from their own thoroughly processed errors, is so vast and integrated.
They've seen it all before internally.
They can look at a complex social conflict and immediately see the underlying structural misalignment because they have lived through it themselves 100 times.
But I know what you're going to ask.
Yeah, I have to ask the obvious question here. Does getting older automatically make you wise? Because we all know that is not universally true.
It definitely is not.
I know plenty of older people who don't seem wise at all. They just seem rigid, stubborn, and deeply entrenched in their own biases.
And that is the vital distinction that proves the rule. Age alone does absolutely not confer wisdom. Time merely provides the space for the accumulation of these failure modes.
So you still have to do the work.
You have to do the work. Wisdom only emerges if the system actively engages in the level 2 learning we discussed. The system must retain, analyze, and reorganize around those failures. That active, sometimes painful reorganization is the astrologer's shift.
If you just ignore your errors, if you spend your entire life endlessly justifying your bad decisions, blaming other people, and never allowing that egoic Judas configuration to collapse, you don't get wiser.
You just get older.
Your misalignments become calcified. You just become a more entrenched, inflexible version of the map teacher who aggressively refuses to look at the pavement.
You spend your life upgrading the Judas software, making its justifications more elaborate instead of switching to the new operating system.
Wow.
The truly wise elder, whether it's an old physician, a master craftsperson, or a grandparent, does not just possess a larger encyclopedia of facts. They possess a denser, heavily processed archive of prior contradictions, failed applications, and corrected judgments.
Their authority is not informational. It is recursive. It is built on the constant feedback loop of their own mapped limitations.
Exactly.
Okay, let's pull all these massive threads together because we have covered incredible ground today. We started with the archetype of the astrologer's shift, this powerful narrative of a man who is psychologically split between his inherited abstract knowledge and his applied enacted truth.
The Judas configuration versus the Jesus configuration.
Right, and we watched how the pressure of internal coherence forced the old system to crash.
And we saw that the crucial step wasn't deleting the old system, but retaining it as an internal archive of error.
Exactly. We used that ancient blueprint to map the actual biological cybernetics of human growth. What we've discovered is that practical wisdom is not a prize for being perfect.
No, perfection is structurally impossible anyway.
It's not achieved by forcing yourself to be a good person through sheer exhausting willpower. True, deep wisdom is about building a highly detailed, unflinching reference library of your own misapplications.
It's about remembering exactly how you fail.
So you can catch yourself in the act, and more importantly, so you can understand the failures of everyone else around you in real time, without moral judgment. Just precise, empathetic pattern recognition.
It is the ultimate shift from reacting emotionally to the external world to recognizing the world precisely through the lens of your own fully integrated, deeply human experience.
So here's my direct challenge to you, the listener, as you go about your week. Think about your own internal systems. The next time you find yourself in that painfully familiar intention-behavior gap.
And you will.
You definitely will. The next time you know exactly the right thing to do, but you do the exact opposite. The next time you delay a hard conversation or snap defensively at a partner or justify skipping a commitment. When that happens and you feel that flash of cognitive dissonance, do not bury it.
Don't look away.
Do not hide from it behind a wall of excuses. And whatever you do not drown it in toxic shame. Instead, file it. Preserve the data. Look at it closely and objectively. Like a mechanic looking at a broken valve.
Because that exact uncomfortable moment of failure is the raw data of your future practical wisdom.
It is the error log that, if you study it, will eventually fix the bug in your code.
And if I can leave you with one final provocative concept from this research to mull over, it is a systems theory concept known as the Bateson move, or pattern correspondence.
Oh, this is the perfect way to wrap up.
Look at what we just did today. We took an ancient spiritual narrative about an astrologer looking at the stars, and we mapped it flawlessly onto modern cognitive psychology, evolutionary neuroscience, and the cybernetic engineering of a thermostat.
The profound truth wasn't found in one specific vocabulary. The truth was the pattern that repeated across all of them: reference, error, feedback, collapse, and reorganization.
The pattern is the truth, no matter what clothes it happens to be wearing at the time. So the question to explore on your own is this. If our internal psychological growth perfectly mimics the collapse and reorganization of ancient cosmic models and modern cybernetic systems, where else in the world are these exact same loops of reference, error, and feedback happening completely unnoticed right in front of you?
Such a great question.
If you understand the shape of the pattern internally now, what happens when you start looking for these same systems loops in global society and the algorithms of the technology we use every day, or the physical ecosystems of nature itself?
Once you know the shape of the schist, you might start seeing the architecture of wisdom everywhere.
Exactly.
That is a brilliant thought to end on, because once you learn how to read the error log of your own mind without flinching, the chaos of the whole world suddenly starts making a lot more sense. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep your eyes open, keep your internal archives ready, and we will see you next time.